The horizon was still a deep shade of indigo when Jonah Parker stirred from the thin blanket he had tossed over the wooden floor of his cabin. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant smoke. His hands, calloused and scarred from decades of tending cattle, trembled slightly as he stretched. Dawn was hours away, but something in the chill of the pre-morning air pricked at his instincts. It was a quiet he knew too well, the kind that usually preceded trouble. He stepped outside, boots crunching against frost-hardened earth, and squinted into the darkness. The land stretched endless in all directions, rolling hills punctuated by the skeletal shapes of leafless trees. Somewhere far off, an owl called, its voice echoing like a warning. Jonah tightened his coat against the wind and walked toward the corral. His eyes scanned the shadows, then he saw her know them. Two figures huddled near the edge of the creek that cut through his property, their shoulders shaking, silhouettes small and fragile against the vast prairie. At first, he thought they might be stray children, but the wind carried the soft, heart-wrenching sound of weeping. His chest tightened. He had encountered grief before, but this raw, unshielded sorrow was different. Jonah approached cautiously, his hand brushing against the grip of his revolver, not out of suspicion, but habit. As he neared, he realized they were sisters, their hair tangled and dark, faces streaked with tears and dirt. Their clothing was worn, torn in places, and their small hands clutched each other as if holding themselves together was the only way to survive the cold and loneliness. "Hey," he said gently, his voice carrying softly over the creek. The sisters flinched, eyes wide, untrusting, shadows of fear reflected in their gaze. He lowered his hands, showing them he bore no immediate threat. "I'm not here to hurt you." The taller of the two, perhaps no older than 17, wiped her cheeks with the back of her sleeve, revealing a red streak where tears had dried into dust. Why are you here?" she asked, voice trembling. Her words were clipped, wary, as if even asking a question could bring danger. Jonah paused, considering his response. "I could ask the same of you. It's not safe to be out here alone, in the dark. This land, it's not kind to wanderers." He took a cautious step closer, carrying with him a loaf of bread from the small pantry he kept in the cabin. The aroma of the fresh bread seemed to fill the space between them, a fragile promise of warmth and safety. The younger sister, maybe 12 or 13, shivered violently, wrapping her thin arms around herself. Jonah knelt on the frost-covered ground, keeping his distance but making himself smaller, less threatening. "Here," he said, extending the bread toward them. "Eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." For a long moment, they didn't move. Fear kept them rooted, suspicion heavy in their small, fragile bodies. Then, slowly, the older sister reached out, her fingers brushing the loaf. The smallest sound, the snap of crust, broke the tension. Hunger, as ancient and primal as the land itself, overcame hesitation. They tore small pieces from the loaf and devoured it with trembling hands, the act quiet but intimate, almost sacred. Jonah watched them, his heart tightening. He had lived among cattle and men who took more than they gave, but he had never encountered such vulnerability, nor such quiet courage. "What happened to you?" he asked gently once they had eaten. His eyes traced the faint scars along their arms and the bruises hidden beneath their clothing. The older sister looked away, eyes fixed on the distant hills. We had no place to go. The others, they're gone. The men, they took everything. Our home." Her voice broke, and she trailed off into a quiet sob. The younger sister clung to her side, pressing her face against her shoulder, trembling. Jonah's mind raced. Stories of settlers, outlaws, and wandering tribes often carried warnings, yet he couldn't turn away from these two. Something about their grief, their isolation, reminded him of his own losses, family taken by fire and sickness long ago. He rose slowly, dusting frost from his coat. "You can stay here for a while," he said firmly. "You'll be safe until the sun rises. After that, we'll figure out what comes next." The sisters exchanged glances, hesitant, unsure if this offer was genuine or another trap. But the warmth of the cabin, the smell of the hearth, and the simple gesture of bread seemed to pierce the fear like sunlight through fog. The older sister whispered something to the younger, and finally they allowed themselves to be guided toward the small cabin. Inside, the cabin was modest. A single hearth offered heat, and a few blankets lay folded on a narrow cot. Jonah gestured toward them. "Sleep here tonight. No one will come looking for you here. No one I don't want." The younger sister sank onto the cot, curling into herself, while the older one paced near the window, eyes scanning the horizon even as exhaustion threatened to claim her. Jonah placed a pot of water on the stove, the hiss of the fire filling the room in a rhythm almost comforting. He didn't ask further questions, not yet. In his experience, trust was earned, not demanded, and these girls had already been stripped of so much. Hours passed, and the sky lightened imperceptibly. The sisters had drifted into uneasy sleep, faces softened in fleeting peace. Jonah remained by the door, listening. The prairie was waking, birds stirred, the wind shifted, and distant howls reminded him of the lawless world beyond the hills. Yet here, in this fragile bubble of dawn, humanity clung stubbornly to life, like frost on the edges of a field. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. Not one, not two, but dozens, moving deliberately, a rhythm that sent a shiver down his spine. Jonah's hand instinctively hovered near his revolver again. The sisters stirred, awakened by the subtle tremor in the cabin floor. "Stay inside," he whispered, eyes narrowing. He peered through the window. Shapes moved in the early light silhouettes of women, singing in low, haunting tones that carried over the plains. Jonah's breath caught. There were more than 100, maybe 150. They moved in harmony, the voices growing louder, more confident with every step toward the cabin. The older sister gasped, pressing herself against the wall. They came for us," she said, awe and fear mingling in her voice. The younger sister clutched her hand, trembling. Jonah's mind raced. These weren't raiders or thieves, these were the sisters' people, responding in a way that only a tribe could. Their song spoke of protection, unity, and a vow older than any law on the prairie. Jonah stepped outside, slowly, hands raised in peace. The wind carried the voices, filled with grief, hope, and determination. The women circled the cabin, their eyes solemn but unwavering. Jonah's heart thudded painfully. This was more than he had expected. They were offering loyalty not to him but to the sisters, and in doing so, to him as well. A bond had formed, forged in shared vulnerability and courage. The older sister stepped forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You fed us," she said simply. "You showed kindness when there was nothing to gain. For that, we stand with you. We will protect this place, and you." Jonah lowered his head slightly, overwhelmed by the weight of their words. In the vast, harsh landscape, he had known solitude, danger, and loss. Yet in this moment, a fragile human connection had bloomed, defying fear and cruelty. The dawn broke fully over the plains, painting the world in shades of gold and amber, a silent witness to a promise that would echo for years to come. The dawn light stretched across the prairie, brushing the horizon with pale gold. Yet Jonah Parker felt no warmth. He stood on the porch of his cabin, watching as the women of the tribe moved with quiet precision, their voices now a soft hum rather than a full chorus, circling and settling into the shadows of the hills. Their presence was protective, an unspoken promise that whatever dangers lurked beyond the ridge would not touch the two sisters under his care. Inside, the older sister, whom Jonah now knew as Kaya, tended to the younger, Lita. She brushed the dirt from Lita's hair and examined her bruised arms with hands that were gentle yet determined. "We need to move carefully," Kaya whispered, eyes darting toward the cabin door as if expecting trouble to burst through at any moment. "They will not forgive betrayal easily. They will protect us, but they also demand respect, and they will test him." Her gaze settled on Jonah through the window. For the first time, He felt the weight of assessment, measured not in words, but in the quiet scrutiny of those who had survived countless storms. Jonah entered slowly, hands raised. "I am no threat," he said, voice calm. "I just want to help. Your sisters, your family are safe here." Kaya studied him for a long moment, lips pressed together. Finally, she nodded. "Your intentions matter less than your actions. But actions speak louder than words." He understood. In a world where men had taken and traded lives like cattle, kindness was a currency rare enough to be tested. Jonah set about making them breakfast, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the small cabin, a fragile domesticity against the rugged landscape. The girls ate quietly, the earlier tension replaced by a tentative comfort. Once they had eaten, Kaya spoke softly, hesitant yet firm. "We had nowhere else to go. Our family, our people scattered or taken. Those men, they came for us, and there was no one to stop them. Until now." Her gaze swept the cabin, landing finally on Jonah. "You offered food, shelter, safety? That is not easily done for strangers." Jonah nodded. "And yet, here you are, alive." The words carried more weight than mere observation. They were a recognition of survival against odds that would have crushed lesser spirits. "I need to know what danger follows you. If I am to help, I must understand it." Kaya's eyes darkened, memories surfacing in the crease of her brow. "It began with our village. They came at night, men who cared nothing for life but for profit. My mother tried to protect us. My father, they killed him." Her voice faltered, tears threatening to spill. Jonah remained silent, giving her space to name the horrors she had survived. "Lita and I ran. We ran until our legs gave out, until the prairie itself seemed to swallow us whole. And even then, they pursued us. They want us for what we represent, for what our people represent. Strength, loyalty, obedience. We refuse, and that makes us hunted." The younger sister, Lita, whispered something to Kaya, and the older one nodded. They looked at Jonah, searching for reassurance that the world beyond his fences might still hold some humanity. Jonah's heart ached. He had encountered cruelty, greed, and violence all his life, but here were two girls, alone and hunted, their innocence ravaged by the greed of men who saw them as nothing more than pawns. The sound of distant hoofbeats interrupted their moment. Jonah's hand went to his revolver, instinctively, while Kaya's eyes narrowed, reading the terrain with the precision of someone who had grown up tracking enemies and allies alike. But the sound wasn't menacing. It was measured, deliberate. Another part of the tribe was arriving. This time, older women, mothers and aunts, their faces stern but welcoming, their hands empty of weapons but strong with resolve. Jonah realized then that this was not a simple rescue. This was a statement, a reclaiming of power and unity that the prairie had long forgotten. The women dismounted, their boots soft against the frost, eyes never leaving the cabin, voices humming low songs that carried the weight of generations. Kaya's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension in Lita's body easing. They were home, even if only temporarily. The women spoke in soft tones, not to Jonah, but to the sisters. Their words were blessings, instructions, and warnings all at once. Jonah understood only fragments, but he recognized the respect and love underlying each syllable. One woman, older than the rest, approached him finally. Her eyes, dark and penetrating, studied him. "You feed them," she said simply. "You offer them safety. That is your first test. There are more, but for now you remain. Watch, learn, protect." Jonah nodded, accepting the unspoken authority. He realized that while he had offered them shelter, they had offered him something in return, trust, fragile and conditional, but real. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, painting the prairie in harsh clarity. Jonah helped fortify the cabin, preparing for the inevitable threats that Kaya's words had promised. As he hammered boards and set traps, Kaya and Lita moved quietly among the tribe, learning, observing, speaking in their language. Jonah could hear their laughter at fleeting moments, a sound as fragile as morning mist, but stronger for having survived the darkness of fear. But the peace was not meant to last. From beyond the ridge came a sound that chilled Jonah more than the winter wind, the unmistakable jingle of metal, the steady rhythm of horses in formation. He froze, eyes narrowing, calculating. These riders were too coordinated, too precise to be mere wanderers. His instinct screamed danger. Kaya pressed herself against the cabin wall, her hand finding Jonah's for a brief, grounding moment. "They have tracked us," she said quietly. "Not all come with malice, but some will. You must be ready." The women of the tribe gathered outside, forming a protective circle. Their voices rose, a low chant that resonated across the hills, harmonizing with the wind and earth itself. Jonah felt an unfamiliar sense of awe. There was power here, raw, ancestral, and disciplined. He knew any aggression from the approaching riders would be met with united resistance, unlike anything he had ever witnessed. As the riders crested the hill, Jonah could see their intentions in the way they held their weapons, the tight formation they maintained. These were not men looking for a simple fight. They were professionals, hired for precision, for intimidation. But they had miscalculated. They had underestimated not only the tribe's resolve, but the quiet courage of the two sisters who had survived unimaginable horrors. Kaya turned to Jonah, her eyes bright with determination. "You stood with us. You showed kindness when none existed. For that they will not harm you. But you must fight with us if they test their courage." Jonah swallowed, acknowledging the weight of the promise he had unwittingly made. For the first time in years, he felt a surge of purpose beyond his solitary life of ranch work. He was no longer just a man defending land. He was a man defending life, hope, and the fragile bonds that connected them all. The lead rider raised a hand, signaling, and the others paused at the crest of the hill. Jonah felt the tension coil in his chest, like a living thing. The prairie seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. But then, a sound broke through a song, low at first, rising with strength and clarity. The tribe had begun again, their voices unwavering, carrying not just courage, but a promise of protection and unity. The riders faltered, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Jonah realized the true battle was not yet physical. It was a test of will, of intimidation, and of trust. And in that moment, he understood the truth of Kaya's earlier words. Survival here depended not only on strength, but on loyalty, courage, and the quiet defiance of those who refused to be broken. Dawn was nearing its peak, and with it came clarity. Jonah stood tall beside Kaya and Lita, eyes fixed on the approaching threat, hands steady, heart racing. The tribe's chant swelled, a chorus of voices rising over the hills. And Jonah, for the first time in years, felt that he was part of something greater than himself, a bond forged in fear, trust, and the unspoken vow to protect what mattered most. The sun had climbed fully into the sky, casting the prairie in stark light. Yet Jonah Parker felt a chill run down his spine. The riders, their intentions clear in every disciplined movement, had paused at the ridge. Their leaders scanned the land, misjudging the strength of what waited below. Jonah's hand rested on the hilt of his revolver, but he did not need it. He had learned over the past hours that the true power here was not in a single weapon, but in unity, trust, and courage, qualities stronger than any metal or gunpowder. Kaya stood beside him, Lita clutching her sister's hand tightly. Their faces, streaked with the remnants of tears and dirt, were calm, determined. Around them, the women of their tribe had formed a living wall of protection, their eyes fierce and unwavering. They hummed and chanted, a rhythm older than any law, their voices a tangible force that seemed to ripple through the land itself. The riders hesitated. Their confidence wavered as they realized that they were facing not just two young women, but 150 voices, bodies, and wills united. Jonah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his bones. He had faced dangers before, but this, the raw, unflinching solidarity of people bound by loyalty and grief, was something far beyond any confrontation he had ever known. Suddenly, the tribe's song rose, louder, stronger, and hauntingly beautiful. It carried across the prairie, a wave of sound that spoke of protection, vengeance, and justice. Jonah felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. This was more than a warning, it was a promise. The riders flinched, uncertain how to proceed. They were trained, disciplined, but they were not prepared for the fury and devotion that flowed from those voices. Kaya stepped forward, her voice carrying over the hum of the chant. "You will not touch us. You will not harm us. Leave this land or face what you cannot comprehend." Her tone was steady, commanding, yet under it lay the weight of history, the unbroken line of generations who had survived by strength, cunning, and unwavering unity. Jonah watched the lead rider falter. They had expected submission, fear, perhaps negotiation, but they had encountered neither. He felt a surge of pride, awe, and relief wash over him. In that moment, the fear of the unknown gave way to clarity. These young women, and the tribe behind them, had survived impossible odds not by fleeing, but by standing together. The lead rider raised his hand, signaling retreat. The others followed, their confidence broken not by bullets, but by the sheer force of human connection, resilience, and unyielding loyalty. Jonah exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from his body. The prairie returned to its natural rhythm, wind rustling the grass, birds calling, and the distant hum of the creek flowing gently. Kaya turned to Jonah, eyes bright with unshed tears. "They will not return," she said softly. "Not today. Not while we stand together." Lita leaned into her sister, her small frame trembling with relief. Jonah reached down, brushing dirt and frost from her hair, a gesture of comfort and connection that needed no words. The tribe began to disperse, moving back toward the hills, their presence a lingering force that promised protection long after they had disappeared from sight. The sisters remained, watching the horizon, absorbing the full weight of what had transpired. Jonah felt the enormity of the moment settle in a life had been saved, not through brute strength alone, but through compassion, courage, and the quiet act of offering bread to strangers. For hours, they sat on the porch, the prairie bathed in the warm light of morning. The cabin no longer felt like a simple shelter. It had become a sanctuary, a place where trust had been tested and proven. Jonah looked at Kaya and Lita, their faces still marked by grief, but softened by hope. "You're safe now," he said, "at least for today. And tomorrow, we'll decide what comes next." Kaya nodded, her gaze distant, but resolute. "We will survive," she said, "because now, we are not alone, and those who thought they could control us will see what happens when we stand together." Her words carried a quiet power, echoing across the prairie, into the hills, and into Jonah's heart. In the hours that followed, the bonds between them strengthened. Jonah learned more of their story, their village, their losses, and the legacy of their people. He saw the strength that had carried them through endless nights of fear and uncertainty, and he marveled at the resilience that refused to be broken. The prairie, vast and indifferent, had tested them all, yet here they stood, united against whatever the world might bring. As the sun climbed higher, Jonah realized something profound. Survival was not merely about defense or vigilance. It was about the courage to extend trust, the willingness to act with compassion, and the power of unity in the face of fear. The sisters had survived because someone had chosen to act with kindness when the world offered none, and he, in turn, had been transformed, drawn into a story far larger than his own solitary existence. By mid-morning, the cabin was quiet once more. The sisters rested, the weight of fear lifting slowly from their shoulders. Jonah sat outside, watching the prairie stretch endlessly before him. The wind carried the distant echoes of the tribe's song, a reminder that they were not alone, and that, in this vast and unforgiving land, loyalty and courage could overcome even the darkest threats. He thought of the journey ahead, the choices they would have to make, the dangers yet unseen. But he also thought of the lesson that had been quietly imparted. Sometimes, the simplest act of generosity, the breaking of a loaf of bread, could ripple outward into a force stronger than any weapon, stronger than any threat. Kaya emerged from the cabin, brushing her hands together, her eyes meeting Jonah's. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. You gave us a chance, and that chance has changed everything." Lita followed, timidly, and nodded in agreement. Jonah's chest tightened, the quiet recognition of human connection settling into his bones like a long-forgotten warmth. As they stood together, the prairie around them bathed in golden light. Jonah knew that the horizon would always hold unknown challenges. But he also knew that courage, loyalty, and compassion could forge bonds unbreakable by fear or violence. The sisters had taught him that. The tribe had shown him that. And the land itself had witnessed it all. Jonah looked toward the horizon one last time before turning to Kaya and Lita. "We'll face whatever comes next," he said, "together." And in that moment, he understood that the dawn was not merely a passage of time, it was a promise. A promise of protection, of hope, and of the enduring power of human kindness. In a world often hardened by fear and cruelty, it is the quiet acts of courage and compassion that forge the strongest bonds. Look around you. Reach out, help those in need, and stand with those who cannot stand alone. Humanity is measured not by power, but by the choices we make when no one is watching.